"You don't have to do this, Clara," her mother murmured from the doorway, twisting the hem of her apron as if she could wring a different future from it. Clara Finch studied the trunk on her bedroom floor, brass latches catching the pale Connecticut morning and flashing back at her like a dare. Every dress and book she owned lay tucked inside for a man she'd never once seen. Wyoming Territory, 1878. At 22, considered firmly past prime in their tidy New England town, Clara had agreed to become a mail-order bride because grief and debt had left no gentler path. "Harold Benton paid for my passage," she said, smoothing a hand over the leather strap. "He's expecting a wife. I gave my word." Her mother took both of Clara's hands. "Write him. Tell him plans changed." Clara lifted her chin. "Nothing has changed except our courage." A week later, a long, dust-streaked train carried her west through forests that gave way to seas of grass, and then mountains sharp as teeth. She read Harold's careful script again and again. The white house he'd raised with his own hands, apple trees in the yard, a ranch 5 miles from a place called Cedar Ridge. He described himself as 42, tall, brown hair going a bit gray. What would it be like to step into a life built by a stranger? Quick pause. If you're into stories like this, subscribe to our channel and drop where you're watching from and what time it is there. Back to the ride west. The locomotive hissed into Cedar Ridge at last, steam and grit swallowing the platform. Clara scanned for a graying man of middle years and found none. A freckled boy of about 12 trotted up, cap tugged against his curls. "Miss Finch? I'm Tommy. Mr. Benton sent me to fetch you. Wagon's this way." "He couldn't come?" Clara asked. Tommy looked away. "He's laid up." Her stomach dipped. "Ill. Shot in the leg. Doc Harper says he'll mend." Shot. Welcome to the West, she thought. Cedar Ridge passed in a blur. Clapboard fronts, a mercantile, a hotel, a saloon. People who looked openly at a woman alone on a wagon bench. "Town's growing," Tommy said. "When Mr. Benton came 5 years back, there wasn't much here." She asked about the ranch, bracing for a sod house. 2 stories, glass windows, the boy said with pride. "About 200 head now. Good water. The land open wide, sky swallowing everything, until a white house rose on a low hill. A man sat on the porch, younger than 42, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, a pistol belt slung low. As the wagon clattered close, he stood and moved with an easy, unhurried grace despite a hitch in his step. "Miss Finch," he said, removing his hat. "Elias Carter. Welcome to Benton Ranch." Clara's relief stalled. "Where is Mr. Benton?" Elias's expression shuddered. "I'm sorry. Harold died 3 days ago. Infection set in. Doc Harper couldn't turn it." The world tilted. Clara gripped the wagon rail. "But I traveled here to marry him." The word bride tasted foolish now. Elias reached up a steadying hand. "I know. He asked me to see things right if it went bad." He nodded to Tommy to unload the trunk and offered his arm as she climbed down. "For now, the house is yours. Harold changed his will when he sent for you. He left it to me." Clara blinked hard. "We never wed." He said it was proper. Elias answered simply. The porch boards creaked underfoot, and he eased the door open. The main room was spare and welcoming. A stone hearth, stout furniture, shelves lined with books that shouldn't have surprised her but did. "Your room's upstairs. Mrs. Whitcomb from town cooks and keeps house here 3 days a week. She'll be by in the morning. I sleep over the stable. You'll have privacy." That small mercy loosened a knot she hadn't noticed in her chest. "How did it happen?" she asked, fingers still numb from the shock. Elias's jaw tightened. "Rustlers try to drive off a dozen head. We stopped them. I caught a bullet in the leg." He glanced at the scarred fabric there. "Harold caught worse." Clara swallowed. "I'm sorry." He was a good man, Elias said. He wanted a woman's touch here. He was looking forward to your arrival. Later, as dusk fell and coyotes called somewhere beyond the barn, Elias brought coffee to the porch. For a time they watched night come down and the lamps wink on in the bunkhouse. "What happens now?" Clara asked finally. "That's yours to decide," he said. "You can sell and go back east, or start over elsewhere. Or stay. It's a working spread, not an easy life. I can be a wife, not a rancher," she admitted. He looked out at the gray horizon. "After the war, I drifted until I found these hills. Some places speak to a man. This one did." He set his cup down. "Harold made me promise to look after things, and you, until you had your feet under you. I keep my word." In the soft light from the window, his steadiness felt like a plank under her boots after a wild river. "Thank you," she said. Sleep came slow, pulled tattered by disbelief and the ache of a plan erased. What was left of her promise now? Morning sun pried through curtains she'd forgotten to close. Clara dressed in the plainest dress she had and pinned her hair up with hands that stilled only after a deep breath. In the kitchen, a plump woman with kind eyes and quick hands looked up from a skillet. "There you are, dear. I'm Ida Wickham. Not how any of us imagined greeting you." She pressed Clara's fingers warmly before shepherding her to the table. "Eggs, bacon, biscuits. You'll need meat on your bones." Wyoming winds carry off anything not tied down. Between bites, Ida kept up a comforting chatter about Cedar Ridge and the neighbors. When Clara asked about Elias Carter, Ida's smile turned wry. "Best horseman from here to 3 counties. Came about the same time as Mr. Benton. Fought for the Union, enlisted too young if you ask me. Folks say he's seen rough years, but he's straight as a wagon tongue now." After breakfast, Clara stepped into air sharp enough to sting. The ranch unfurled wider than it had under stars. Barn, stables, a long, low bunkhouse, corrals penned with bawling calves. Elias's voice carried from the barnyard as he parceled out work. "Jackson, ride north fence. Heard about strangers up that way. Porter, that new mare needs more work before she'll take a longer trail." We spotted Clara. He tipped his hat. "Morning, Miss Finch. Want to look around? If I'm to make sense of anything, I'd better," she said. He walked her through the corrals and pumps and sheds, explaining the yearly arc of calving and branding, the breeding lines Harold had invested in, the water rights that gave their pastures green when others went brown. Facts stacked quickly, most of them new to her. "It's a lot," she admitted. "I don't know the first thing about cattle." "You don't have to rope steers to own them," he said. "Harold handled contracts and accounts. You could too, or hire a manager. Like you." She tried to make a question and failed. He shrugged, unreadable. "Or you could sell. Buyers come running." She looked past him to the mountains. "And you?" "The men. We'd find other work," he said easily, but the muscle in his jaw suggested anything but indifference. "I won't decide in haste," she answered. "I'll stay through winter. Learn what I can." He nodded. Something, relief, flickering behind his steady expression. October slid toward November. Mornings, Clara studied Harold's neat ledgers, inked columns of numbers that told the story of seasons. Afternoons, she rode alongside Elias or one of the hands, learning the lay of land that had felt like the moon on that first day. She wrote her mother often, saying she was safe and well and leaving out truths that would only keep a woman awake nights. The mountains put on their first sugar coating of snow when Elias stamped into the doorway one evening. "We've moved the herd to winter pasture," he said, shedding cold from his coat. "Looks to be an early one. There's another matter. Buyers from Chicago will be in Laramie City next month. Harold always went himself to get a fair price." Clara set her pen down. "Then I should go." Elias blinked. "It's 3 days each way. Cold riding. Laramie can be rough." "I didn't come this far to hide behind a desk," she said. Besides, I've been practicing. You show me a better seat than side saddle. A ghost of a smile warmed his features. We'll leave in 2 weeks. Mrs. Wickham will help with proper coats. The morning they set out bit at fingers and noses, but the sky was clean. Clara wore wool trousers under her riding skirt, a flannel shirt borrowed from a trunk of Mrs. Wickham's late husband's things, and a heavy coat that turned the wind. Her hair was braided and tucked under a brim. Elias checked the cinch on her saddle with a quick strength that always surprised her. "You'll do," he said, approval plain. Hours stretched into miles. The rhythm of hooves and her own breath found a cadence she could stand, though muscles protested. By afternoon, soreness sizzled from the base of her spine to her thighs. "We'll lay up at Cottonwood Creek," Elias said. "There's a lined shack, solid roof, 2 cots." The cabin was exactly that. Rough logs, a stone fireplace, supplies stacked in a corner. Elias vanished to stable the horses, and Clara coaxed a flame, fingers clumsy with cold. When he returned, he knelt and added kindling until the fire caught properly. "I've never done this," she confessed. "Eastern houses have staff for these things. Out here we tend to our own," he said, shedding his coat. "You'll pick it up quick." Dinner was salt pork, beans, and coffee, which never tasted so good. As they ate, she asked where he'd learned to live like this. "Necessity," he answered. "My father died when I was a kid. There were mouths to feed. Then the war came, and I lied about my age. 16, and I figured uniform might be a road out. Learned plenty about staying alive. I wish I never had to." She tried to picture him as a boy in blue. "You were scared," she said. He shrugged, a movement that held 100 stories. "Sometimes. After, I drifted with the cattle. Texas up to Kansas, over and over. It suited me until it didn't. In the dark, they settled with a proper breadth of floor between cots." "Elias," she asked, "why did you stay after Harold died?" He was quiet a long beat. "Because I promised him I would keep the ranch steady and look after you until you decided your road. I don't break promises." He added, almost as an afterthought that landed heavy, "and because you deserve a fair chance to choose." Sleep came easier under a roof that didn't groan like the freight car had. 3 more days on the trail taught her to read cloud edges and dead reckon from a distant butte. She learned to swing down and up without thinking and laughed at a joke tossed over a shoulder from a cowboy she'd barely met a week earlier. When Laramie City finally spread across the flats ahead, she drew a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They stabled the horses at a livery and checked into the Union House, where Mrs. Hartley, a capable woman with a steel set to her mouth, ran a clean operation and brooked no nonsense. "No foolishness here," she informed Clara as she handed over a room key. "Dinner's served till 8. Baths cost extra." "Worth every penny," Clara said, meaning it. An hour later, clean and wearing her best altered wool dress, she joined Elias in the dining room. Freshly shaved and in a clean shirt, he looked different. Less foreman, more gentleman, something in between she couldn't quite name. Over roast and vegetables, he ran through buyer names and habits. "Samuel Collins starts low, 15% under market, and hopes you blink. Drummond will nitpick your herd all day to shave another cent. Pearson follows whichever way the wind pays him." "Am I counter?" she asked. "Facts," he said. "Don't let them talk you into forgetting what you're selling. And confidence. Speak from what you know." She slept that night with numbers and names stacked like cards in a deck. The Exchange building in the morning dwarfed most anything she'd seen in Cedar Ridge. A brick pile of 3 stories with big windows, and men everywhere talking business over tin cups of coffee. Elias didn't lead. He walked beside her to a cluster of suits. "Gentlemen," he said, "Miss Clara Finch, owner of Benton Ranch." The men turned, surprise flickering, then smoothing. "Miss Finch," said a portly fellow with mutton chops. Samuel Collins. These are Drummond and Pearson. Clara shook hands, smiled. I understand your firms have been pleased with Mr. Benton's cattle. They sat, and the game began. Collins opened low, draping concerns about rail rates and Eastern prices over the table like a blanket. Drummond questioned weight and winter feed. Clara laid out Harold's records, summer pasture gains, health of the herd, scars of last season's prices to prove the current market. When she hesitated, Elias's quiet presence at her shoulder steadied her spine. 2 hours later, the deal they inked sat between Collins's first offer and the number she would have crowed over in her heart. The contract for next year's drive needed only small edits to language Harold had set. Collins shook her hand with an assessing look. You bargained keenly, Miss Finch. Mr. Benton chose well. Outside, the winter light felt brighter. I thought my voice might shake, she admitted. They didn't notice, Elias said. You sounded like you belonged there, because you do. Over lunch back at the Union House, Clara asked, after the war, you said you drifted. What turned you? He studied the street beyond the glass for a moment. A saloon fight in Abilene that got away from me. Woke up 2 days later thinking I might die. A preacher stopped by, didn't scold, just asked what I was running from. Made me look at what was left of me. I decided I wanted more than whiskey and sleeping under a sky I didn't care about. He sipped his coffee. Met Harold on a drive after that. He needed a man who understood cattle. I needed ground under my boots. She told him her piece then. The arithmetic of grief and debt after her father's passing. The notice in a newspaper. Her mother's practical courage. The reality of being 22 and labeled picky in parlors that prize different things. Harold's letters were kind, she said. I thought we might find a steady contentment. And now? Elias asked. She looked at her hands. Now I don't know what I want more. To keep the ranch or to prove I can. Maybe those are the same thing, he said. They spent the afternoon buying coffee, flour, ammunition, cloth, and small luxuries Laramie afforded. By evening, they had a plan to ride at first light. The sky held, but the wind came up sharp. They just finished a cold lunch when Elias looked west, face changing. We need to make Pine Creek's line shack before dark. That bank is building fast. Snow chased them down the trail, first a whisper, then a white wall and a hard push. By the time they found the cabin, Clara could barely feel her hands. Inside, Elias said, thrusting the key into her aching fingers before he disappeared with the horses. A stubborn flame caught in the fireplace on her second try, and Elias had it roaring inside a minute when he stamped in. He hung their wet coats, set coffee to boil, and watched her with a worry that made her feel at once foolish and cared for. Will the herd be all right? She asked through chattering teeth. They know where to tuck in. That winter pasture's got windbreaks and draws. Cattle are tougher than they look. He handed her a steaming tin cup. So are mail-order brides from Connecticut, apparently. She huffed a laugh, tension easing from her shoulders. As night pressed in and wind scoured at the shutters, they sat close to the fire. The warmth seeped in. I've been turning something over, Clara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I want to stay. I want to make this place work. The smile that broke across Elias's face felt like sunrise. I hoped you'd say that, he admitted. He stared into the flames, jaw working, then looked back. Clara, I've come to care for you. More than's tidy, given the circumstances. She took a breath that felt too big for her ribs and let it out. And I care for you. I didn't come looking for that. Slowly, as if crossing a creek on slick stones, he reached and brushed his knuckles along her cheek. May I? She closed the angle that remained, and when his mouth met hers, gentleness and heat tangled in a way that made her reckless and steady at once. When they parted, he exhaled a shaky laugh. This changes things. Maybe for the better, she whispered. He laid his bedroll on the floor. "We'll do this right, slow. You deserve that much." The storm held him hostage the next day. He waited out to check the horses and returned looking like a snowman, reporting they were fine. They talked to fill the hours, her seminary education, his boyhood in Ohio, a preacher's hard question, the pieces of Harold's character. Honest, careful, particular. That evening, they agreed to be circumspect in public and honest with each other, to give the ranch their best and let the rest find its pace. Travel the day after felt like swimming upstream through white. They didn't make the next line shack, but a sheltered hollow with pines and a rock face made a decent camp. Elias rigged a lean-to with the tarpaulin, banked a fire, and wrapped his coat around both of them for sleep. "Not the courtship I promised," he murmured, his breath stirring loose strands of her hair. "Circumstances," she said, burying her cold nose against his shirt and grinning despite chattering teeth. Dawn came clean and bright, and the snow had settled just enough to travel easier. When the ranch buildings finally rose out of the afternoon light, and the chimney sent up a lazy thread of smoke, emotion caught Clara off guard. "Home," she said before she could stop herself. Elias's head turned. "Good to hear you call it that." Tommy came trotting out from the stable, eyes wide at their snow-crusted state. "Glad you made it, Miss Finch." "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Whitcomb's been by keeping the stove fed. We worried after that blow." "We waited it out," Elias said, stepping around to help Clara down. Her legs trembled when her boots met dirt. "All quiet here." "Mostly," the boy said. "Reckon folks in town are telling the storm like it was worse than it was." Inside, warmth and the smell of stew wrapped around her. She scrubbed travel from her face and changed into a clean dress while Elias unpacked. They ate at the kitchen table, both too tired to say much. After, he stood like a man fighting himself and lost. In 2 strides he was there, his hand cradling the back of her head, mouth claiming hers not with care, but with a hunger that made her knees unlock. They broke apart breathless, and he pressed his forehead to hers as if his will could settle them both. "I wanted to do that since Laramie." "I'm relieved you finally did," she said, and the way his laugh rumbled against her palms warmed her deeper than the stove. He backed away with effort. "Tomorrow," he promised. "There's ranch business to discuss." His eyes said plenty about what else they'd discuss. Winter settled hard. Days became a blend of ledgers, writing, and dinners where conversation stretched long after plates were cleared. Elias kept propriety around the men, as did she. In December, Clara decided the ranch would have Christmas like any family should. Mrs. Whitcomb arrived with an army's worth of recipes, and together they dressed the house with pine boughs and ribbon. "It suits you," Ida said, nodding at the garland. "And if I may say, you and Mr. Carter's suit as well." Clara blushed and smiled. "Is it that obvious?" To anyone not blind. On Christmas Eve, the dining table was lengthened with boards and sawhorses, and the men filed in scrubbing at their hair and collars with bashful pride. Elias came early, clean shirt and string tie, and something in his eyes that tugged at her stomach. He held out a small brown paper package. "Before the crowd," he said. She handed him his gift in return, suddenly shy beside the fire. Inside the paper he'd given her lay a carved wooden box and, nestled in cloth, a silver brooch shaped like a rose, each petal detailed so finely it seemed to breathe. "Elias," she breathed, "it's beautiful. Saw it in Laramie and thought of you," he said, fingers careful as he pinned it at her collar, his touch skimming the delicate skin at her throat. She gave him a leather-bound journal with a good pen. He opened it to find her inscription, "For your stories, past, and those we'll make. May our shared chapter be the longest and happiest." "You've given me more than a book," he said, voice rough. The ranch hands devoured Mrs. Whitcomb's feast, and told tall tales while two men sought a fiddle and blew a harmonica. Clara had small gifts for each: gloves, tobacco pouches, pocket knives, which were received with a chorus of "Much obliged, ma'am." At the end, old Harris lifted a tin cup. "To Miss Finch," he said, "who's proven she's got iron under that silk. And to Mr. Benton, whose work lives on." "Hear, hear," the men echoed. Clara swallowed around the tightness in her throat. After the bunkhouse door banged behind the last hat and coat, it was only the two of them and the soft hiss of the fire. Elias's gaze found hers and didn't look away. "Clara," he said, as if saying her name answered something in him. "I love you." The room seemed to come into sharper focus. "I love you too," she answered, the truth as solid as the floor. He drew her close, and for a while there was nothing in the world but his heartbeat and the smell of pine. When he pulled back at last, he took her hands. "Marry me, not for the ranch, not because you came west to be a bride, but because we found something worth making a life around." "Yes," she said, the simplest word and the truest. "Yes, Elias Carter, I will." He kissed her like a man who had counted hours to do exactly that, then rested his forehead against hers again with a grin that made him look boyish. "How soon?" "Spring," she said, thinking of green pushing through thawed ground and the world righting itself. "After the worst of winter, before summer work takes us." "Spring it is," he agreed, though impatience sparkled in his eyes. She wrote to her mother, at last telling the full shape of what the West had done with their tidy plans. Harold's death, the ranch that had become hers, the man who had earned her yes. The letter that came back weeks later trembled with relief and questions and a blessing cautious but real. "Your father would say fortune has found us in a crooked way," her mother wrote. "Your happiness rings clear in your words. I wish I could come, but the trip is impossible for me." Through January and into March, snow lifted and blew back and lifted again. They planned a small ceremony on the ranch with Reverend Hale from town, neighbors and hands invited. Nothing fancy, but exactly right. The days fell into a rhythm of work and small kindnesses that knitted a life. Elias mending a binding on one of Harold's books she favored. Clara stitching a tear in his coat without comment. The two of them standing on the porch, shoulders touching, saying nothing and everything while the world turned silver with frost. April arrived on a breath. You could almost smell. The meadow behind the house, where Elias had first outlined fence lines and pastures and the extent of what could be theirs, went soft with new green. Mrs. Whitcomb helped alter an ivory silk gown Clara had brought from the east into something simpler that caught the light in a way that felt like hope. Ida found a few early hothouse blooms to tuck into Clara's hair along with sprigs of pine. The men set up chairs under the sky. Reverend Hale cleared his throat, his voice carrying clean across the open. Elias waited beneath an arch wound with evergreen, looking at her as if the world had just steadied for the first time. "Dearly beloved," the old words rolled by, familiar and strange all at once. But it was when they spoke the promises they'd written that Clara felt tears heat her cheeks. "Clara," Elias said, voice steady, "when you stepped off that train, I promised a friend I would look after you. Today, I give that promise to you, not as a foreman or out of duty, but as a man who loves you. I will protect and provide, yes, but more. I'll be your partner in everything. I'll honor your strength and your tenderness in equal measure, and I'll walk next to you wherever this land and this life lead." She smiled through tears. "Elias, I crossed a continent to marry a stranger. Instead, I found a man who saw me clearly from the start. What I could do, what I could become, what I needed. I promised to be your equal in our work and our home, to back your dreams as you've backed mine, to love you completely for all our days." They traded simple gold bands, And when Reverend Hale announced them husband and wife, Elias's kiss felt like a vow and a homecoming at once. Afterward, there was food and laughter, music from a fiddle and harmonica, neighbors lingering because the air was too sweet to waste. Elias tugged Clara aside under the old oak where the light cut through leaves like coins. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, as if trying the name on his tongue. "Are you happy?" She drew him down and kissed him once more just because she could, more than I knew was possible. He shook his head a little, still in wonder. When Harold said he'd sent for a bride from back east, I told him he was inviting trouble. A city woman might take one look and run. I was wrong, and I thought a trail-hardened foreman was no fit for a lady's sensibilities, she teased. He laughed, slipping an arm around her waist. Scandalous, falling for my boss's intended, if she'd ever been his. Fortunate, she corrected, resting her head under his chin and listening to a heart she'd come to trust in storms and quiet alike. The path she'd boarded a train to follow had curved without warning and set her down in a life she hadn't imagined. One built on respect, hard work, laughter, and a love that felt as solid as the land they both now called home. If this story moved you, tap like and subscribe for more long-form tales, and tell us in the comments what you'd love to hear next.